Most companies have an existing portfolio of applications, databases, and server infrastructure that's been growing over the years. Cloud services have caused an explosion of even more resources created in silos across data centers and various cloud providers. Edge scenarios are poised to create an even bigger sprawl. Azure has customer resources running around the world. Hundreds of millions of Azure resources are organized, governed, and secured daily by customers using Azure Management. Customers have asked us how to bring Azure Management to all their entire IT estate. Azure Arc extends Azure's control plane to manage servers and Kubernetes clusters across on-premises, multi-cloud, and edge. This empowers operators to organize, secure, and govern resources anywhere, and developers to safely deploy their applications and Azure data services to any infrastructure. Azure Arc makes it easy to adopt cloud practices on-premises and other clouds, all with central IT guidance and governance from Azure. Welcome to Azure Arc.
Hey, everybody. Once again, it's me, it's Jake Gordon. Welcome back to AzureFunBytes, where we get together every week. That's right, every single week. We get together and what do? We talk about the different services, we talk about different products, and especially we talk about the people that equal a really great Azure experience. And so I've got a great guest today. We'll get into that in a minute. I just wanted to remind you, we've done some stuff around this week's subject, which you saw that video at the top of the show about Azure Arc and hybrid cloud. If you want to go check out this video, or I should say this episode 42 with Thomas Maurer, he was really great. He gave us this really incredibly useful introduction to hybrid cloud. And so go ahead if you want after the show, take a look at that. But even more after the show, you need to go and take a look at this. It's right immediately after What's Next for Windows. It is an event about Windows 11. I think that for developers, this is going to be something really incredible for you to check out. I know how much you all love all these features like WSL and how it all works together with Windows, and I think you're going to learn some more. So speaking of learning some more, my guest today wants to help me learn some more about hybrid cloud and data services and how they all can get connected together using Azure Arc. So he asked me to show this just to kind of introduce him. And to do that, to introduce us to Azure Arc Data-Enabled, or I should say Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services, I've got the all the way coming when you're in the UK, correct?
That's right, yes.
Rob Sewell, thank you so much, Rob. I really do appreciate you joining me today. I know that it's not the earliest there. And I'm cutting into your evening hours, so I really do appreciate that you took some time. So just to let everybody know, you're an MVP with Microsoft. You've got that accreditation that shows that you're an expert at the technologies that you're working with. And I think that you are the first MVP that's joined me here on the show. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
No problem. And so, Rob, I always kind of want to remind everybody before we kind of get into the conversation that you can go ahead and you can join us in answering a question. Are your data services configured for failover? There's where the poll is. It's up on the Learn TV website where you can go and start getting involved in the conversation. If you go down, you'll also see that all the show notes for this week are there. So everything that you'll need to kind of go along with this session is all in the notes. And on top of that, Rob, before we kind of go into our intro, I want to remind everybody that there's also Microsoft Learn. And if you want to get some free education on hybrid cloud, all these different other Azure services, head over to Learn, aka.ms/learn. And of course, make sure that you send your questions, use the chat. We want to hear from you. So, Rob, I want to hear from you. And I ask this question almost to every single guest that I have, and I'll throw it out to you. So, how did you get here?
Wow. So as you can see, the beard is grey. So this is my third career, and it started when I couldn't work 24 hours. I used to work shifts, 24 hours a day. My wife got poorly, and I had a computer, and I started fixing stuff because it broke. And then other people said, "Can you fix stuff?" And I literally went from there to helping small businesses, to then working in service desks and then second line. And one day somebody said, "Would you like to be a DBA?" And I went, "Oh, okay." So I was once a production DBA.
Oh, wow.
I've always loved automation, dealing with thousands of instances and databases. You can't do things one at a time. So it's kind of progressed from there. And now I just literally, I say I help people automate things, because that's what I spend all day doing, and I love it.
And you've got tons of content online, like talks that you've done. You've got projects that you're working on. Here's your website that people can go to. You've got DBA tools, DBA reports, SQL Diag API, DBA tool scripts, and functions that I suppose Azure Functions to help get. Is it Azure Functions, or just a general function that you've created?
They're just generic functions. Yeah, I mean, DBA tools is, we were talking last night, it's coming up on 1 million downloads in the PowerShell gallery. So we're about 30,000 off. It is the #1 open source PowerShell module for dealing with SQL Server. And whilst it was built for on-premise migrations, it now expands to do pretty much everything that you need. I know of companies that use it with tens of thousands of instances, and I know of little shops who use it just to, there's one guy who does all the IT, and they sort it all out. So yeah.
And it looks like it's all open source. It's capable of you just going and grabbing it, all these different methods. You can download and zip it, or you can clone the repo from GitHub. It's always good to see people utilizing GitHub to kind of open source their software, make sure that people can kind of see what's going on, and of course make contributions to what you're working on. And so I started off the show at the top with a little trailer that I found on, and it's all about Azure Arc. And before we kind of dive directly into the data services, why don't you give everybody a quick idea of what exactly Azure Arc is? I mean, I know what it is, but I want you to give us kind of a recap.
So Azure Arc is designed to enable you to manage all of your infrastructure, no matter where it is, from a single pane within Azure, and be able to control policy, control backups, and all of those things from a single place.
Gotcha. And excuse me. And of course, there's tons of information about Azure Arc. There's this Azure Arc infographic I wanted to bring up real quick, and it gives a good idea of exactly what Azure Arc does to help enable users to have almost like a single pane of glass via the Azure portal to be able to kind of keep an eye on all their IT solutions, whether it's, multiple clouds, so using Azure, maybe one of the other big public clouds, on-prem, and that implements, or you can implement Azure Stack Hub, Azure Stack HCI, so that you can basically stick your own Azure in your data center and still have it connected to the portal where you can see everything else at the edge for your IoT devices, things like that. And it all kind of comes together with Azure Arc. And I think that our users, or I should say our viewers, are really been interested in it because we all aren't really necessarily in one place anymore. I feel like that's a huge theme lately. Are you seeing people going to like multi-cloud solutions or hybrid solutions a lot lately?
I think probably it's kind of the other way around. I don't think people move to a hybrid cloud solution. I think what happens is companies get taken over, companies merge, teams merge together, and each one is looking after infrastructure in different areas. So, maybe you suddenly become the data administrator for 4 or 5 companies, and some have their data in one of the other public clouds, some have them in Azure, some have got them on their own data centers, some have got them in a different data center. And suddenly you're like, oh, this thing's gone wrong. Okay, where do I go?
And I imagine sovereignty of that data and things like GDPR really can kind of dictate exactly where your data is, whether it's in a specific region in the cloud, or if you have to meet some compliance where certain data can't be stored anywhere else but a data center. I think that's all really gives people some options.
And also you want to be able to have a single place where not just yourself as an administrator or a developer can access it, but where you can provide information to people in management, people in security, auditors, etc. If you can do it from a single pane, it's so much easier, and Azure just enables that.
Absolutely. So I know we don't have a ton of time today, and I want to remind everybody that make sure you stick around immediately after the show. Check out what's next for Windows. 12 p.m. Pacific. It'll be 3 p.m. here on the East and 8 p.m. British summertime. Make sure you kind of keep a watch on what's going on. But until we do that, Rob, I'd love to give you an opportunity to kind of show off some things and give us a big kind of step through what exactly Azure Arc Data Enabled Services. So, or I should say Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services. It's a mouthful. So before I bring up your screen, why don't you give me just a quick definition of what does that mean, Azure Arc-Enabled Database or Data Services?
I think as you've perfectly proved, it means that it's got a really bad name that nobody really actually catches hold of. Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services is like it sounds, it's Azure Arc for data. So it enables you to have evergreen SQL, either SQL Server, Microsoft SQL Server, or PostgreSQL available to you no matter whereabouts you have it from a single pane.
And that includes services like Citus, the Postgres Hyperscale, or whatever it is called. And I think that's also Azure SQL Managed Instances that you can work with both on-prem databases and then sync that and have that data always up to speed, or I should say the servers always up to date, because Azure SQL, that service does its best to make sure that you have the latest, greatest, and patch levels always up to date, things like that. And I guess, is that one of the things that you can really manage through Azure Arc, is ensuring like there's a certain level of patch management and level that's across your board?
It's completely taken care of for you. Just like with Azure SQL Database, the AZ offering, where the SQL engine that's running behind the scenes is kept up to date. It has the latest version of the code from straight from inside Microsoft coming out.
Mm-hmm.
Azure Arc-Enabled SQL Managed Instances. They're just a pod with some containers in. The containers that are running the SQL engine are, again, always kept up to date. And the beauty of having things in containers is that you can keep your data safe, really important for data folk, but you can take the container away and you can replace it with the new one, with the up-to-date one. We're keeping it up to date.
Gotcha. So with the ephemerability or ephemeral nature of containers, are we actually looking at it as because this data can be synced across multiple data centers, multiple clouds, then that ephemerability of containers isn't quite as big a deal as maybe it was in the past? Because I know that, it was kind of controversial whether or not to put your databases in a container.
Still is. It's still absolutely, it still is, and I think that's because it's new and data folk. I used to be a production SQL DBA in defense, so I didn't take any risks. I was super careful. I didn't want to do anything crazy, and in those days we had SQL servers running on tin in a room, and then we moved to virtual machines, and that was crazy, and there was lots of debate, and there needed to be lots of white papers and proof that running your database in a virtual machine was the same performance and everything else as if you were running it on a piece of tin. And I think it is that same discussion that's happening now.
Yeah, there's always this internal struggle between different teams, especially because they felt ownership around certain systems, and giving up that ownership can be something that brings up feelings more than anything. And I think that one of the big parts of the DevOps movement and people moving to agile software development styles or methods is to reduce how much there's an individual ownership of particular systems, and to allow the teams to kind of work in tandem to make sure that these systems that are critical to uptime are available and not siloed to one particular team that has all the information.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's important always to look after your data properly, and sometimes you need the SMEs in that to enable it to work as fast as you want it to. Just the same way as you want your React developer, your C# developer, whoever, to be the best at making sure that code performs quickly, your database is the same sort of thing.
How do you think that the DBA's role has kind of changed in the last, say, few years with the advent of, more database as a service hosted across the cloud in general?
It depends entirely on the DBA. There are DBAs who will be able to complete their careers looking after extremely important databases that only run on tin in rooms, and that will absolutely always happen in the foreseeable future. Other DBAs have really taken it forward. They've become data engineers. They're interested in how you transform the data, how you move it, make it available for people to consume in various manners. Other DBAs like myself have gone to more of a DevOps infrastructure role, where we're making sure everything's created. But when you create something in Azure, you're not just creating something. You want to make sure that you have all of the compliance, all of the integrity, all of the security. You want to have your private endpoints in place. You want to make sure that all of these things are embedded into the process. And because I love automation, I don't want to do any of that manually. I want to be able to write some code to be able to just, you want another one? Okay, we'll have another one.
Set up your pipelines, kick off the pipeline when you need to build something new, and move on with your life, because I'm sure you got plenty of things to do other than sit around and install SQL manually on a machine.
Thanks to DBA Tools and some contributors who've made some great stuff there, I haven't installed SQL for a long time manually. It's just install -dba instance, boof, some parameters and go.
That sounds ideal.
Oh, yes.
Especially in our world's environment and how fast we need things. There's not a lot of time to delay. Provisioning needs to be speedy. It needs to be efficient. It needs to be repeatable. And it also needs to be reliable.
Yes.
Reliability of systems is so important because of reputation that's associated with whatever services or product you're providing, especially now that people are working from home more and more. And if there's a particular service that you're relying on, that people are going to be accessing at all hours of the day, it's super important to have reliably built and available backed systems and servers and all that to make sure that you're never offline. So we've got about a good 35 minutes, and I'd love for you to kind of give me a view into these Arc-enabled data services. Sound good?
Sounds brilliant. Should we start with Ben's question?
Sure.
So Ben wanted a SQL Managed Instance. I think
Okay.
Ben really just wanted a SQL instance as quickly as possible.
Mm-hmm.
When we were like, the portal, it'll take 6 hours to go, that was a bit much. So I'm going to show you how we'll create one first, and then we'll have a look at some of the other bits. Because the beauty of Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services is that you can deploy your SQL Managed Instance or your Postgres Hyperscale instance from a whole range of different methods. The first one that we'll show is within Azure Data Studio. Now, Azure Data Studio, for people who don't know, is open source data client. It works exactly the same on any operating system and enables you to connect to any data services.
It's very familiar to using VS Code. Like when you look at it, it's kind of the same structure. Even if you look on the left, everything in that toolbar kind of reminds me of like, I really like it. I was using it to work with some SQL servers recently.
There's a really good reason for that. It's because it's based exactly on the same code as Visual Studio Code. I like to joke and I like to say the difference with this is that data people like pretty colors. Mm-hmm. As you can see on the left, we've got our registered server list in effect, and I'm able to color code it for different environments. And that's one of the things that you get in Azure Data Studio that you don't get in Visual Studio Code. The other big difference is that in Visual Studio Code, you get a great debugging experience. But in Azure Data Studio, there is no debugging at all.
Gotcha. So it's mostly just for like management control of individual like notebooks, the data itself.
You said another one of my favorite words, notebooks. I love Jupyter Notebooks. Jupyter Notebooks enable me to take the code, execute it, store the results, and put them in an incident management system or whatever. And Azure Data Studio, I honestly think, is one of the best editors to do that in. If you look at some of my other videos, you'll see exactly why. But let's come back to this, because
let's jump into it.
We've given Ben, who said, hey, all you need is Azure Data Studio, which he uses anyway, and you connect just as you would expect. You get an extension, and you look for Arc, and we've got an Azure Arc extension. And with that installed in our server pack, we get this extra block, and we can connect to a Azure Arc data controller. And that is the thing that does all of the magic. And here we've got a nice button that says New Instance. And we click on this instance, and right now we have two choices. We've got Azure SQL Managed Instance. This is where I'm talking about Evergreen SQL, the latest available SQL Server engine from Microsoft. And we have Postgres Hyperscale server groups. that are available for you to use as well. So we want a managed instance. That's what Ben said he wanted. And he can then click on this and it says, which resource types? Azure SQL Managed Instance. I accept the EULA, make sure that I've got the right tools, and I click next. And it says, give it a name. Well, Ben is, he likes to name things after himself. And there's a joke that I like to name things after Ben, because we'll come to that in a minute. So we need a username, and then we need a password. And the most challenging part of any demo is to be able to put a password and speak at the same time. And then we get some more options. So do we want a single replica or do we want 3 replicas? Well, we like to make sure our data is kept safe. Perhaps we'll have a 3 replica. And we need a storage class. Storage class is very important. It enables the people controlling the infrastructure. This is a Kubernetes cluster. To enable for you different types of storage for different needs. Maybe you've got different performance. Maybe you want to give your dev team the slightly slower SSDs. Maybe production has the super fast flash arrays. But this is all controlled under the hood by Kubernetes. So we're going to pick Ben's local storage. And then we'll say, how many CPUs do we want to have for this managed instance? So we'll take 3 as a minimum and a limit of 4. And then we can pick some RAM. Let's have some RAM. We'll go for, let's go for 8 minimum, and memory limit must be greater than or equal to, yes, we'll have 10. And then we hit this deploy button. And that opens up, no thank you, we don't upgrade in the middle of demos. That opens up a Python notebook. And as you can see, it's already pre-filled with everything I need, and it is in fact running. And what we can see is it's running an AZ data call, and that's going to go off and do its thing. If we jump into Visual Studio Code, we can have a look and we can say, well, kubectl, get pods, namespace, arc-az, and we can see that we already have 3 lots of Ben's MI. And we've got a 0, a 1, and a 2. And right now, we've only got 3 of 4 containers running. It takes a moment just to get SQL up and running. So while it does that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a different way that we can, if I can press the right down button, that we can create an Azure SQL Managed Instance. So one thing we can do is we can save, this is very important, I think, use the secret management module from the PowerShell team to keep your secrets safe. So I'm just going to create a credential using my secrets that are safe. And then I'm going to set that to be my environment variables for my creation. And we make sure we're in the right namespace, and we make sure we give it a name. Now, at the command line, so if Ben doesn't want to click around in a GUI, but he'd rather just run a command at the command line, he can type on the right screen. Whoop. No, that's the wrong screen. Whoop. Okay. He can type AZ data, Arc, because we're looking at Arc, SQL, on a SQL, MI, create. These things are named pretty well. And we give it a name. And this is our SC, storage class for our data with the D, storage class for our logs, and then our CPU's request and limit, and our memory request and limit. And we'll just press go on that, and that's going to start going away. So use the variables that we've got stored as an environment, and that's going to go off and do its thing.
So I just want to remind everybody. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, carry on.
Oh, I was just going to say, if you're not familiar with AZ Data is a CLI. It's a command line utility. It uses the REST APIs, and it gives you a way, just like Rob was using, to have a CLI access to create, modify, work alongside with your databases. As you can see, it's available for Mac, Windows, Linux, you name it. It's a Python script essentially, and so you're just kind of working with Python and not having to do anything else but just invoke the commands. There's tons and tons of things that you can get out of it. I really recommend, if you're going to be working with databases on Azure, that you install this utility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So while those two are going off and doing those things, let's just dive into some of this, because it'll explain why everything should be called Ben. This is one of our obvious reasons as to why we need Azure Arc, and particularly Azure Arc-Enabled Services, in that when Flexera asked people which clouds they were using, 78% were using hybrid. It's a good place. And like we talked about, we've got our services in all over the place. Public clouds, on premises, in clusters, in SQL, on tin under the desk. And that means that our management is just this crazy toolbox. As we were talking about before, we just like reach in, which I need to look at it, the thing for that system. Where is it? Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services makes that simpler. It keeps your SQL up to date. That's called evergreen SQL. It enables you to have elastic scale, just like you got in Azure, where you can just swipe a button and scale things up. It's as easy to do that. We can do that from Azure Data Studio, or from the CLI, or from an ARM template, or from a Bicep template, if we've got a direct controller. And it just gives us one single view of everything that we need. And I think my battery is going. Oh, we'll just keep going. So the thing I wanted to show you, because I haven't got it in my demo, is that you get to see all of this stuff in the portal. So we can deploy in Azure Data Studio and in the portal. The data controller has two ways of working. Right now we're indirect. So we're actually working on a Kubernetes cluster that's running on 3 NUCs in my office. And it's not connected to Azure. But you can set it up and directly connect it. And either way, you get Azure Arc-Enabled Managed Instance, and you get Azure Arc-Enabled Postgres. Possibly more things to come.
Yeah, I'd imagine that this is just going to grow, especially as different database requirements are needed. Maybe it gets beyond just that. I mean, we've got Cosmos. The idea of maybe Cosmos at home, if you will. I don't know if that's a thing yet, but it would be interesting to see all these different types of databases accessible and through that, like I said, that one single pane of glass.
Yeah. So the other part of looking after our data is that we need metrics and we need access to logs. And in the portal, we can get the metrics for all of our SQL instances that we've got running on these clusters in any cloud, in any data center, anywhere. And we also get all of our logs. And because you've got all of your logs, that means you've got all of your alerting capability. You can set policy. You can be notified when things get created or when things exceed limits. You can make use of all of that good Azure Monitor capability for all of your data that's running on instances in other clouds or in your data centers at home. But even better, we don't have to go and look for a monitoring solution to look after all of our instances. It's going to be able to connect to all of these places and authenticate. The hours I've wasted trying to authenticate monitoring systems across domains or across data centers or across companies, it's certainly a challenge. Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services comes with Grafana built in. So without connecting to Azure, we can just connect to a Grafana instance and pull back all of these great metrics and Kibana for our logs. So super, super good.
Yeah, I mean, there's no need to kind of build your own elk stack or something like that if all this is ready for you.
It's just all done for you. It's brilliant. And in the directly controlled Azure Arc-Enabled cluster, you can not only have this available to you locally, but the Grafana will give you metrics from Kubernetes as well. It's super, super good. So most people, if you're watching this, you're like, well, wow, how do I learn about this?
Mm-hmm.
So there's three great ways of learning. Firstly, go and read the documentation, because you should always go and read the documentation, and it's pretty good. Secondly, there's an Azure Arc Jumpstart website, which is super, has lots of templates and demos that you can follow along. And thirdly, the reason why everything must be named Ben is because Ben Weissman and Anthony Nosatina, two friends of mine, have written this book called Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services. Now, Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services is still in preview, and there is already a book out. And the book not only helps to understand how to use Azure Arc-Enabled Data Services, but also will give people a good grounding in Kubernetes and what all of these new terms mean.
And of course, there's the Azure Arc learning path that you can get access to if you head over to Microsoft Learn. Here's a link in the chat if you'd like to go to it. I think it's really, really super useful. You'll learn about Azure Arc-Enabled Servers, Azure Arc-Enabled Kubernetes, all these really useful bits of free training. And one of the things I like is it's gamified. You can see I'm on my way to the next level. While I have a moment to give you a chance to sip your beverage, I want to remind you, we're here on Learn TV. We've got a poll going. So far, are your data services configured for failover? I want to know. And so far, a lot of people say it's complicated. And I'll be honest, I think that's a more common answer for something like that than anything else, because the failover is kind of terrifying.
It is. It certainly is.
Yeah. All right. So let me bring back up your screen, and I'm going to let you kind of continue. We've got about a good 13 minutes left.
Excellent. So let's see. This says we're ready. It says Ben MI is ready. We finished deploying. I don't know how long it took, but it's about 5 or 6 minutes normally to deploy a 3 replica cluster with an availability group and a listener and a read-only listener and a read-intent listener. And the people who know what those terms mean know the challenges of setting all of those things up. And we've just enabled somebody to do it by clicking 4 buttons and filling in a few forms.
Mm-hmm.
So let's remember what we called it, and let's look for our endpoints. So we have got Ben Verbedung, and we've got the Ben MI instance. So our Ben MI instance, we just run this here. We've got our endpoint, and we've got our dashboards. So if we just click on this, it will, of course, open up in this window down here, and I will put the password in whilst we're down here.
Mm-hmm.
And then bring it up. Oops. Bring it up. There we go. We've got Grafana with all of our dashboards. We can choose our time ranges. We can choose our refresh times. We can look at any of our hosts and any hosts that I've had on this data controller in the past. And we've also got host node metrics. So without even doing anything, we have got the ability to monitor not just our data services, but also our underlying infrastructure and see how hard it is working.
So you're not having to go into the portal, the Azure portal, and look at those raw metrics. They're all here under this one single place, this pane of glass, if you will. I think that's really super useful.
Yeah, because one use case for this is that you don't have it directly connected. Maybe it's on your articulated lorry, maybe it's on your ship or your submarine or your nuclear power plant, something like that, where you don't want it connected to the internet. But every now and again, you go and get the logs and the metrics from it, and then you move them over here, and then you upload them into Azure, and then make use of the search capability, the policy and alerting capability. I think it's really clever. But let's connect to our instance.
Sure.
So add a connection. We'll put this in, and now let's see if Rob can type the password yet again. Doing well so far. And I'm just going to call this primary so we can see what's going on in a second.
And these are running locally on your computer, am I right?
No, this is running on a NUC about 4 feet away from me. We've got a little NUC cluster. And excellently, we're not going to be able to do that. So once time when that happens, one of the best things to do is just to reload, but we might just stop, make sure that we've got the right port number, and we'll start Azure Data Studio up again and just make sure things are going to go okay. So yeah, this is running on a Kubernetes cluster that is, that's the password. It's okay.
Yes, it's in. Does the IP address, is that supposed to be a colon or is the comma fine there?
That is a comma. So
okay,
nicely they keep it so that we can just copy it. And look at this. You can see what's going to happen. It's not going to work. So we're going to, yeah.
When you do it and you do it live, sometimes these things happen. Is there any way? So can you tell me a little bit about Weave Scope?
Okay, so let's have a look at a container. So we created BenMI. So if we pull up one of these containers, this is BenMI number 2, and it consists of 4 containers. And you can see that it talks to BenMI 1, BenMI 0, and also to an operator and our logs, gathering all of that information. And if we have a look over here, you see we've got 4 containers. So we've got FluentBit, that's our Azure Arc thing that does its magic. We've collecting. We've got Arc SQL MI, that's our SQL server running SQL. And we've got our Arc HA supervisor. So that's taking care of all the high availability behind the scenes. And I'm going to come back into here and say, okay, you're not going to connect. That's all right, because as it happens, we created 2. So
always useful.
Well,
redundancy, especially in demos, always tends up to be so necessary. I know I've done a bunch of demos where one of the things that I was definitely thankful for is I actually had a bunch of like little GIFs of the demo itself that I recorded. So when I couldn't do it live, and I think I was like on a stage in Stockholm when it happened, it was terrifying.
I see. Yeah, it's a scary time when that happens. And I'm going to have to do that because this taskbar that is set to always hide is deciding not to. So we've got our instance, and here we get another example of what Azure Data Studio can do for us. It can give us more information. It can, if I just zoom out for a minute, you can see that we get pretty colors because we're data people. We like to have colorful graphs in our editors. So let's open up a file and we'll create a database. So we're going to create a database called J is Awesome. And
sounds good to me.
We'll use that database, and then we'll just create a little table, and we should just insert some data into this table, and then we'll select from it. So it's, it says at each one of these times J is awesome. So this must be true. The data says so.
and we always go by the data.
Absolutely, data is king.
Who am I to argue with the database?
So this is a thing I really love to do, because what we're going to do is we're going to find this. This is the name of our pod, and we're going to come back into here, and we're going to go kubectl delete pod, Oh, we didn't copy it. Okay, so then verb in gone. Have I spelled that correctly? See, that's why we do this with the one that's called Ben MIs, because it's much easier to spell when you're typing live. I delete that pod. So the pod is gone.
Mhm.
And if we were to try and connect to it, nothing, because we've got no instance. And if we have a look at our pods, we'll see that it's already back up and running. We already have 2 of our 3 pods available to us. And we just have to wait for SQL to come back up. And this is, I think, is really, really important for people to understand what's happening here. We've created a pod with our containers in it that were running SQL. One of those containers was actually running the SQL engine, was providing us with the queries and dealing with our data. And it was writing to the table, writing then to disk in our MDF file and our LDF files onto some disks that's controlled by our storage class. And our storage class is separate from our pod and our container. So even though I've deleted it and it's gone completely, let's have a look and see, we back up and running it. No, we're still on 2. But one thing we can do is if we, it's kind of cool. How long did you say we had left?
We've got, as far as time?
Yes.
We've got about 9 minutes.
And 9 minutes we can do about 9 minutes. So we describe our pod, and
It looks like standard Kubernetes stuff to me.
it's absolutely standard Kubernetes stuff. And all I want to find is the name of my PV, my persistent volume claim. It's a PVC, actually, technically. And when I did this earlier, I just pulled it straight up. Come on. Shout if you see it. Probably people screaming at the screen going, you've gone past it, you've gone past it.
Yeah, I haven't seen your persistent volume. Yep, there we go.
I cleverly named it PVC. Oh, no, I didn't. What I was going to show you was that, no, I'm not going to be able to do that either, was that what we have is, if we jump onto, doesn't matter, let's pick a host. If we jump onto one of our hosts, that's that password, and we have a look.
Always the worst having to type a password live.
Oh, I love it. I love the challenge. What we have is, if we ls slash, oh, come out. We've got our second drive. We've got Azure Arc, and we've got our local storage, and we've got a load of volumes. And these are the volumes that are provided to us for our. What's your favorite number, Jay?
Let's go with 42.
42. I got no idea whether this is the right one. Oh, good shout, my friend. Good shout. So we can look at our Arc SQL MI, and you can see that in there we've got our directory. That is where our SQL is running. So we can look for MS SQL. Oh, permission denied. Okay, that's all right. Do that.
Turn the big key and use sudo to get in.
Absolutely, and prove that I can type my password one more time. And when we can go for data, excellent. Let's try that one. There we go. And it's not the one that we are connected to, but if it had been, we would have seen our J is awesome database files would be sat here, even while our SQL was still up and running. Now, hang on a minute. You've just shown that we've destroyed a container and you've talked about the data still in this storage. Yeah, prove it. Okay. So let's change our database. So we're still on the same connection. We haven't reconnected, still connected. Prove that we're still connected to the same place. Ben Berberdone 01. And it's 1950 my time. We've still got all the data and it's still from 6 minutes ago. And we've just completely blown away that container. I love that demo.
Wonderful. Wonderful. And so how does backing up your data kind of fit in this whole kind of conversation?
So one of the storage classes that you can choose is your backup storage class. And then you just do SQL backups, because please, folks, just do SQL backups. SQL is really good at doing backups and it makes sure everything's right. Now, you've got really, really big databases, then there are other folk who do clever things with your storage classes. Because your storage class, if you take it back to a virtual machine, it's just a LUN, this dump of storage that's presented to your host, ready to be given to your VMs. So you've got this lump of storage. Clever folk have worked out that there are ways of taking that and moving it to different places and stuff. So
very, very interesting.
The answer to your question is there's two things. It's normal SQL backups, like you run normal SQL backups, backup-DBA database from DBA tools. You back up to a path, which is presented to a storage class, which you control on your Kubernetes host or in the cluster, in the cloud. Other people enable cleverer stuff at a lower level with storage classes, which looks fantastic.
So I've got a quick question from the audience, and I'll bring it up here. How can we get access to Learn resource shown by the instructor? So how can we get some information about that Kubernetes? Is it the Jumpstart?
Jumpstart.io or the book. If you want if you talk about the code that I'm using to run this, then if you go to beard.media/presentations, that will then take you to all of the presentations that I ever do, all the slides, all the code, and I will make sure that I upload all of this code up to there as well.
Wonderful. So we've got just a few minutes left, and we'll say goodbye in just that. But I want to give everybody some results from our poll. It looks like we got some really nice participation today. Let's take a look. So are your data service configured for failover? And 34% as compared to no at 28 isn't so bad. And it's complicated. Kind of says to me that a lot of you are trying to do the right thing. You're trying to make sure that your data is always available. So that's always super important. I wanted to also give you all a big reminder. Coming up right after this in just a few minutes, what's next for Windows? You'll learn about all the new Windows 11 for developers information. You'll get a great amount of knowledge around what is coming. And Windows 11, everybody's going to love using it. I'm a Mac user. I'm actually looking to get myself a Windows computer so that I can start getting the goodness that comes with Windows 11. Well, we got one more comment here. Pratik wanted to say thanks a lot. Wonderful demo. I appreciate you all watching. And Rob, I appreciate you being here and part of the show today. So where's the best way for people to contact you if they want to learn more?
So absolutely, the best way to get in touch with me is on Twitter. I'm SQLDBA with Beard. Now, SQLDBA with Beard, not SQLDBA with a beard, because when I changed my handle, I became SQLDBA with a bear, which was funny, but it's SQLDBA with Beard. So feel free, get in touch, ask me questions. I promise I'll get back to you.
Spectacular. So that's going to be just about it. Thank you, everybody, for watching today. Stick around in just a minute. You're going to get started for what's new in Windows, or I should say what's next for Windows. Noon Pacific time, that's 8 p.m. British Summer Time. It is 3 p.m. here in the East Coast. So for myself, for Rob, let's give everybody the big wave goodbye and say thank you all for watching. We really appreciate it. We'll see you next week here on Azure FunBytes. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.